Well, thank you so much. We have Phil Tubman in here for our today's presenter. The topic is MOOCs Back to the Future. Phil, maybe you could just say one word about yourself too.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not going to be enough, but
I'm Phil Tubman. I work in ISS, and I'm also a part-time PhD student with in educational research, and that's my supervisor. I'm also joint supervised by the School of Computing as well, so there's a lecturer there as well. So shall I start? So you might think why have I called it MOOCs Back to the Future? And I thought I'll explain that first. There was a kind of a character limit, which so Back to the Future is quite short, but the reason I chose that title is because I think we're in a position with MOOCs now where we've kind of got one foot in the past and one foot in the future, and I want to try and identify that position and look at the things to it. And I want to suggest that maybe we've actually got our backs to the future, and maybe we should turn around, and look at what's happening in the future in terms of our, educational delivery for this. So first of all, I'm going to start off by maybe saying some things that are probably not very controversial about different platforms and how MOOCs, if I need to explain, they're kind of totally online courses that have thousands of participants enrolled on them. They're very tutor light. They're very student heavy, and there's a lot of kind of videos, multiple choice questions, things like that. So I'm going to suggest that's kind of from a sort of behaviorist paradigm, and that if we're thinking about collaboration in MOOCs, we should maybe be looking at some different sort of collaborative ways of building the environment. But that's jumping quite ahead. I just thought I'd give you, in case you get lost at some point, you can think, oh, which bit are we up to? Okay. Right, so we'll start off now. Oops, it's not that one, is it? So the first slide is just got some pictures in there. I just thought I'd take the Back to the Future theme a bit further. So this is the moment where Marty McFly turns up in the 1950s with his kind of futuristic car. So I thought that was a fair metaphor, and that's just an example of what schooling apparently looked like in the 1950s. Everyone's carrying bits of paper around, although they do seem to be looking down at it, much the same as they might be looking at their smartphones now. Maybe there's a parallel there. Maybe it's just a picture. Okay, so taking this idea of behaviorism, this is kind of another picture of a kind of a Skinner behaviorist machine. It surprises me a little bit. I do look at that and I think that looks quite a lot like a laptop, doesn't it? Kind of bring the front down, get your paper out, type on it. Like a 1950s version of Netflix or something. Anyway, so that's kind of a 1950s version, and then it kind of gives you I suppose it's giving you results as a kind of a paper receipt. And I wonder how far we've actually moved forward when you look at a FutureLearn course there. We've got kind of video lecture. It's got subtitles, which is nice, and it's a very clean, pretty interface. But ultimately, it's watching a video and then testing your knowledge. I think there is another aspect to that screen which maybe sort of betrays a little bit of how people work and learn nowadays, and that there's about 1 million tabs open on the Chrome browser, which you may or may not have noticed. But that was more by accident, to be honest. I just noticed that afterwards. But still, we've got this idea. You're sitting there. The person in the screen before, he could be watching that video, doing that test. There's not actually a massive amount of difference there. So I think that I'm suggesting that the actual platform, that the physical platform, whether it be this kind of metal structure there, or whether it's the online structure here, is kind of responsible for that kind of way of teaching. And I'm asking the question: well, what would it look like if we were to construct a platform on something much more like constructivist principles? And FutureLearn, to their credit, I'm kind of being a bit unfair on them there by just showing those two slides, because FutureLearn likes to be known as FutureLearn, the social learning platform, not the MOOC platform. The social learning platform. So they have tried to start from a kind of a more constructivist base, and they're kind of supported by the OU, so there's quite a rich history there of this kind of online computer-supported collaborative learning. So if has everyone been on FutureLearn before? You can see it on every page. So going back again, each page is like the two there. They're very clean. One video, one test, and we'll have a look at it later on in the seminar. But on that to-do button up here, there's basically a list of steps. You see each step is numbered, and you go through each step. You know, it's quite simple to use. You go through, and on each step there's an opportunity. Not on that one, but you can see just below there it would say comments, and when you click on comments it opens up, and here are all the comments. It's very easy to write a comment. You just type something in there and it appears there. So we do have this talk which is on the platform, and that's mediated, like I say there, through the discussion forums. I'm suggesting that discussion forums have got kind of interactive qualities or affordances that maybe shape the type of discussion that can occur in that space. And I've pulled a quote there from Winston Churchill when they were redesigning the Commons Chamber, which is where the most important talk in this country should happen. He was in favour of a kind of a horseshoe shape, but you know, just to show there were people who were living in the past even then, they went with what they had before, but slightly smaller. So it was still kind of very adversarial type of framework for talk, a bit smaller actually. So I'm suggesting that we shape our environments, and then our environments after that shape us. So I'm looking at what can we do to this type of environment that embraces the massive, that kind of takes account of the fact that it's tutor light, and that enables people to talk in a constructive way. And like I said before, to FutureLearn's credit, they have started with a kind of a theoretical viewpoint in their design. They started with the Lorillard conversational framework. So learning involving a dialogue. It does say there between teacher and student. The whole framework does account for dialogue between student and student too, and other stuff as well. And then that reveals the sort of the cognitive dissonance which can be filled through more talk. So unlike other MOOC platforms, we've said that there's a discussion step on every page. There's lots of opportunities to discuss, and the discussion does tend to be around the content at hand, so it becomes more focused. It's around the shared conceptual object. You do have the kind of the foundation for having that kind of shared conceptual object, which you all add to. So this organises the talk, and I say increases the likelihood of collaboration, maybe under the guise of knowledge construction, and various people have talked about that, or cognitive activity. I think to some degree, just to stay on this point here, to some degree, I think to conceptualise learning in that formal way, I'm not sure about that, because the comments I read, people are being kind of reflective and meta in what they're saying, but they're not leaving kind of digital trace evidence of that reflective meta stuff like you might expect people to if you were kind of setting it as a kind of a distance learning, credit-bearing activity. They would think, I need to leave evidence of this. Whereas on FutureLearn, they might write, that's an interesting comment, I'll take that away and think about it. Which doesn't sound like very much, but there might be a lot of deep thought behind that comment. So I don't know, I'm still thinking about how to conceptualize learning within the environment, because I think there's maybe some false negatives you might have actually, people who doesn't look like learning, but it actually is. And like we said before, it's quite easy to comment. It's not overwhelming. You just get to the step, you can type what you like, and so it kind of encourages talk, which is sometimes a problem for distance learning. People don't use the forums so much. But on the other hand, I think other consequences of the design, which are maybe less constructive, are that the comments are ordered chronologically. So the older posts, they get pushed down to the bottom of the feed. It doesn't get pushed to the top because someone replies, like it would in a Moodle forum. It would go to the top with the latest reply. It just keeps getting pushed down. The notifications are only triggered to people who are already in a conversation. Now you can see why they do this, because you don't want to be sending massive emails about every single conversation that has an extra post. So you can understand why they've got that constraint within the massive environment, but it means that if you're not in that conversation at the beginning and it gets pushed down the timeline, you're going to have to do some searching to find the conversation. There is a feature called Most Liked. So that's kind of comments on the platform that other people have liked. it's not necessarily what you might be interested in, but it's a way of kind of filtering those comments down. But I think the most critical thing for me, and these things are designed, so a design takes with one hand, it gives with the other. That's the nature of it. I think the platform being stepped means that users don't often look back. And I chose this picture here of these sheep all walking in one direction. And they're kind of, they can talk to the sheep next to them in their sheep language, but they can't talk to the sheep who are right behind them, the people who started a week after them, or the people who started a week in front of them. There's more chance of the people in front of them. They tend to just walk along in this thing. And other kind of other ideas I've seen from FutureLearn when they've talked about redesigning the platform is this idea of, we'll have a discussion bus, so the first 30 people get on the bus and then it goes off and then the next 30 people. And you're still you are creating small groups there that people can discuss in, but you're not necessarily linking them by affinity. You're just saying chronologically kind of get in the bus and get pushed along the production line. So I think that's the big thing. I'll show you what I've designed to plug into the FutureLearn platform that I think it sort of gets around that particular point, especially that enabling people to look back and to find things by affinity. So I did some analysis on the conversations that were in the platform just as it was. We looked at 10 different MOOCs, and we just measured their conversation length. So we're just using a very simple proxy for is there likely to be some kind of social constructivist collaboration, all that kind of thing happening in the conversation, and taking the assumption that if it's longer, that it's more likely. And we actually found a very surprising result, for me anyway, and that was that all the MOOCs, some of them were on corpus linguistics, some were on Ebola, some were on soils, all different types of things, some were on English literature, Wordsworth, all different subject matters, all different scales of people actually. Very small courses, which might have a couple of thousand, to very big ones, which have 20,000 people. And they all seem to follow this kind of line here, where the majority just have one reply, a few have two, and then by the time you get into 6 and 7, you're talking in every single MOOC, less than 1% easily of all conversations would have more than 5 posts. I think that's a very low bar for this sort of collaborative activity, this kind of building on a shared object and all the other conceptualizations for social constructivist thinking. So other research that I've read as well about other MOOC platforms, they don't describe this necessarily in terms of conversation length, but they describe the activity in those forums as just decreasing over time and suggesting that it's because they're getting very busy and very dense now. On Coursera and on edX, the discussions are much more like what you'd see in Moodle. They're kind of threaded discussions. There's kind of starter posts and then replies to replies. So the whole thing becomes like a kind of a tighter and tighter knot, basically. And if you want to find something in there, then go and try and find something in there. But good luck, basically. So it just shows that we've got this problem with scale, and the scale is kind of the scale is the problem, really. It's hard to kind of find what you're looking for. Remember, in a MOOC, you're there in this, in this cohort of 1,000 people. You've all got the same interests, roughly, but you can only kind of talk to the people around you, sort of being shunted along this path of content, basically. So I looked at some other dimensions. I thought, well, measuring length alone is not necessarily going to be a kind of a hard and fast, reliable method of measuring what's happening in that conversation, and we'll move into why that might be. So I added 2 more dimensions to the kind of analysis that I was doing on these big Excel sheets, basically. And we looked at turn taking, so people taking turns, the initiator, and then other people, and then looked at the unique participants. So how many people are in there? That represents the diversity of opinion in the conversation. How many people are taking turns, and that represents whether people are going further, whether they're triggered to make a second reply. It's not just saying, hey, I know the answer here, but I'm never going to speak to you again. It's kind of saying, I know the answer, I'll listen to your reply, and I'll give a further reply, and then that would become a kind of an extended social, I call it. So I've written here, these are proxies for higher levels of cognitive activity. They're not evidence of, and I think I said before, I'm not sure how you're going to find that evidence actually, because it might not look like what you think you're looking for. But they're kind of used to act as kind of these constants within this experimental design for the plugin that I've developed, and to see what happens before, what happens after, basically against these three constants: turn taking, diversity, and length. They're the three things. I'll show you some results in a second. So in terms of turn taking, what I realise is the FutureLearn platform is created very simply. The conversation, it says very low bar to adding a comment in a conversation, very low bar to adding a reply. But the replies only happen on one level. You can only reply, and then the next reply is a reply to the first one. So it's only kind of one hierarchy deep. You cannot reply to this one here. You can reply to that one there. So it's only kind of one thread deep. So I worked out from that there's actually only 9 possible types of combinations of conversations that could occur. Nothing is outside this set of 9. And we'll look at the set of 9 in a second, and then I'll give you a kind of a simplified version of it. So this is the whole set of 9, and I'll go through each of these. So the first one, someone writes an initial repost. Someone replies, they then reply further, the initiator comes in with another reply, and then the initiator goes further. Everyone's talking, and they're all taking at least 2 goes, basically. And then we kind of have these other ones. Let's look to another one, QA. Someone makes a post, someone makes a reply, the conversation doesn't go further. So that's kind of called that QA because it does seem to be a kind of ask a question, give an answer. There's 3 at the bottom called lone. So that only the person who was in that conversation is the initiator. So that might give evidence of reflective activity. Someone might just be writing, oh, I get to the character limit, I'll reply to myself. And this can happen. We've had some quite long lone posts, actually. Maybe these people are just shouting out for someone to talk to them. Because another important fact, actually, is that everything starts as a lone post. You don't think, I'm going to create an extended social post. You've got to start with a lone post, and you've got to see where it goes, And some of them are going to grow into these long conversations. Some of them are going to die. Some of them are just not going to do anything. And then, so the other group that I've got, so we've got extended social where anyone goes further. So if anyone takes more than 2 goes, it's an extended social. It's quite a low bar. I accept that. But it's a difference between the other one, which is QA, people just giving questions and answers but not going further, and lone, where there's only one person in. And the one in the middle, limited social, I think this is almost the saddest conversation, because someone said something, someone's replied, the initiator eagerly come back to try and bring that conversation back to life, but nobody has actually replied to that, which is kind of a little bit sad that someone wants to talk and they're basically being ghosted, So just to and there's different, there's 4 different extended socials, and I think there's you can kind of get a character for each one when you look at it in this way. I've maybe looked at this table too much, but on one of them, let's have a look. So we've got one here where people are only making first replies, but the initiator's kind of replying to them. So this could be, I thought this could be like a multi-dimensional Q&A, kind of ask me anything. So people get their reply, and then they don't ask anything else, but the initiator's giving lots of posts, So that's kind of, I thought, there's different classes within here that you can kind of look into. I put the full taxonomy there, because nothing falls outside this table. I think that's the important thing to know. And then to look at kind of a simpler version of it, which we've tried to go over. Only one person involved may reply to themselves, and then kind of examples. These are just made-up examples, but they are fairly representative of the kind of thing you might see. Simple question, simple answer. Again, simple question, simple answer. Someone comes back, no one replies, they're getting ghosted, sad face. And then the extended social where different people are coming. These are very simple. There's only 2 people involved in these conversations. So then we look at the next measure, which was the kind of the diversity measure. So you know, diversities indicate new information, more variety of concepts. And I've got some categories here as well, just to kind of. So we've got lone, one person talking to themselves in their conversational unit. We have two people, so they're the ones we've just been looking at. I've called them Watercooler Conversations. FutureLearn have got this. I don't know how you would categorise that comment in a. You know, I don't know how you would categorise that comment. That's okay. Can we come back? Here we go. Okay, so what I want to think now is how we can turn our backs from the future, how we can turn towards the future and try and embrace these things like scale and peer-supported learning. What can we do specifically to the platform to enable this kind of practice? And I kind of, you know, I've taken this quote here as something I found. It's Marshall McLuhan. He says basically, any present technology is always full of the content of the last technology, and I think that sums up kind of maybe where we are with MOOCs. We've got this new technology. We've got our DeLorean, if we're Back to the Future again, and we've taken it back in time to kind of meld it in with the Skinner teaching machine. So what can we do? What techniques might we have? What theory or practices do we have to turn ourselves towards the future to embrace this kind of mass collaboration activity? And I'm looking at a method. The method I'm looking at is design-based research method. So it's a way of, you know, empirical educational research, you know, looking at the data, which we are doing, theory-driven design of learning environments. So we're designing the learning environments with theory in mind, and looking at the relationship between theory, designed artifact, and practice. So I do have a designed artifact, and you will see it shortly, I promise. So that's the methodology. So it's kind of build something, see if it works, iterate, get some feedback, iterate it, go back again, and you know, keep doing that until you get some kind of result which seems to chime in with theory or add something new to the theoretical precepts. And I think when we're looking at collaboration and group work, I've got this slide here. I think we can divide collaborative activity. We can kind of break it apart. And I think you know, there's this guy Elliot here who we'll look at in a bit as well. It's kind of, you know, we divide it: coordination, cooperation, and collaboration. So I've got some pictures which represent what they are. So coordination, people they've just emerged at the same spot. And then cooperation, well, something needs to cooperate there, otherwise there's going to be a road traffic accident. But collaboration is where we're all working together to try and create this jigsaw puzzle, which is the shared artifact. So I don't think we've even got past this question, actually, when it comes to collaboration in MOOCs. I think people are trying to jump up here before they've looked at these two steps. And so, you know, So I think I'm starting there, trying to coordinate the different contributions and try and foster some cooperation. Then we can, you know, take it one step at a time. And the theoretical frame that I found here is this thing here called a Stigma. I hope that's the right way of saying it. And it kind of it's a form of communication where signs are left in the environment, and those signs serve as stimulus to other agents so they can transform the environment. And in terms of education, can kind of the knowledge can be emerging from that thing. And it comes from this kind of biologically rooted idea that this is how termites build their nests. So each individual termite doesn't have a master plan of what the nest is going to look like, but they can sort of smell the pheromones of the other termites who leave these smells around, and they kind of, what emerges are these massive artifacts of you know, and this is a cross section, so you can see inside the artifact there's actually quite a lot of detail and intricacy. So again, we've got, you know, mass collaboration. This is defined as anything where membership is greater than 25. Well, I think MOOCs kind of hit that bar quite easily. And he's suggesting that this theoretical concept, Stigma, is the only way we can kind of scale collaborative activity beyond this 25 number. I don't know if that's kind of a magic number or plucked out the air or something like that, to do some more reading to discover that. So there you go. That's my theoretical framework. We've got these ideas of cooperation and looking at design-based research. I promised I'd show you the tool. So here's the comment discovery tool. So each word, this is the conceptualized of it. Each word that anyone writes, it becomes a sign, and that sign becomes kind of valued in terms of how many other people have left that sign, and you end up with this thing, a word cloud. So I've co-produced the development of this with colleagues in computing, and essentially you can see here. I'll show you it in practice, but you can see here I've chosen 2 words. It's redrawn the word cloud, so that word cloud is only of words that also have those 2 words in too. So you're filtering a lot of things out at that point, and then you can link directly to that comment, so it's quite easy again to join in that conversation if you want to. And let's have a look at it in practice. So I did. So here's one I designed earlier. Oops, go back. Okay, so I'd show you the FutureLearn platform, maybe kind of jumping around here, but this is the FutureLearn platform. You see you've got a to-do list, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, etc. And what you would do here, you go all the way down to comment discovery tool. Actually, when you're on this step here, let's do it exactly as the students would. They'd watch this video, they would maybe make a comment there. And after they've done that, let's get them away again, they would probably stick straight onto that one, and then this describes the comment discovery tool. This is very prototypical, I will say. It's very much a prototype. In a way, I kind of deliberately released it to see what people would make of it, because I thought, well, people are going to have to make something of this. There's no point in kind of explaining in great detail what it is, and so people kind of, have this big manual for use. I thought, we'll just see what happens when do people get it, do people not get it, and what are their first impressions of the tool. And then you click away here. This clicks away not to a completely separate system. You're still within FutureLearn, and it has shared your unique user ID with my app now. So I can I've got the means. I don't track very much, but I've now got the means of tracking what you're doing in my app. So I will have some digital trace data, but this is still kind of emergent in the design. And you click on the words. So we're interested in, let's look at what might you be interested in. Does anyone want to pick a word? I'm just going to pick daffodils if no one else is going to pick a word. So daffodils, obviously Wordsworth wrote this poem about daffodils. What you might see from this diagram here, if anyone's done the course or knows this, is that there's this kind of controversy that he nicked a lot of it from his sister's journal. And so that's why Dorothy is quite a big word there, because within the comments that include the word daffodils, a lot of them are kind of talking about this Dorothy controversy, really. William's gone quite small there, so there's a screenshot there, isn't there? And then we can click on other things. Let's see. Let's click on lake. Now, like I say, this is quite, and all of a sudden you're down to, I don't know, maybe 50 comments. Now, just to give you an idea of how many comments are in the system before this tool, you're looking at something like, 100,000. So to immediately do 2 clicks and then you're in 50 of the subject that you're actually interested in is quite, I think it's quite, quite cool. But there are things here that are not, like I say, it's very prototypical. There's not really much instruction. There's no other ways of filtering. There's not multiple word clouds. All these things are very possible. This is just a kind of a very first draft of what this tool could be. And then let's just follow the whole thing through. So we read through these comments. We click on the link, and this is going to take us directly to that comment. So we can see the whole conversation now. What we would do is scroll down a little bit. Oh man, that was a lone post, so we would hit reply and reply to it. Or maybe it was the one above it. But it takes you directly to the comment anyway. That's the tool. It's a new affordance on the platform, so going back to this idea of kind of interactions and affordances. And it enables people to filter down by affinity, taking the main unit of meaning as the word itself. I'll talk a little bit about why that might be a good or a bad thing. Let's see. That's actually not my next slide is, but let's have a look. Oh no, back in the scene. Okay, so I said I'd give you some kind of results. We've seen the word cloud now. We've described what my conversation types are and the unique participants, the different dimensions I'm looking at. I don't know in how much detail you can see this, but this is kind of merging all those dimensions together into one graph. And what you can see here, 2 represents, that's a run of the course with no content, with no comment discovery tool, and 3 is with a comment discovery tool. And so you can see the difference between the 2 bars is kind of what's happened in terms of the raw count of what's happened in that conversation. And at the top here, you've got your extended socials. This is everyone talking all the time. And what you can see, a big result you can see there, is that in run 3, where there is a comment discovery tool, there are more blue. You can just see that quite visually. The blue is bigger, and blue represents cocktail parties. So we've got more people with the comment discovery tool that are in conversations with more than 2 people, 3 to 9. You can see that quite clear. There's even a slither of a conference in there on run 3. So we don't know if that's caused by the comment discovery tool or if it's just an outlier. The other thing we can see quite clearly is we can see these lone posts have dropped quite a lot. Now these are raw counts, they're not percentages. I do have a table of the percentages, but the percentages it's dropped by, I think, about 9% or something like that. So there's been quite a considerable drop in lone posts, or you could say a growth in lone posts into the other types of posts it could be. We see that more of the Q&A posts are cocktail parties than water cooler. So we can maybe suggest that the tool as it stands, very prototypical, very take it or leave it, as you see. I would say seems to be having an impact. I do have more statistics on this, which is available through the paper that I've just put forward to the Learning Sciences Conference. It may or may not get published, but if you want to read the full thing, I can send it to you. So I think, in terms of the research, does it encourage more diversity? I think yes, we are seeing more cocktail parties, clearly. Does it affect the types of conversations? I think some of those lone posts are growing into QAs. That's the next step. It starts as lone, goes to QA, and then it grows to extended social. So I think some of them are going into QA, and some of them are kind of going further. But the question is, when we're looking at signs, if we're saying this is a good idea, this is a valid way forward in terms of creating, this kind of filter, creating this tool, if that's a valid way forward, we've got kind of 2 ways, I think, of looking for meaningful signs. So where is the meaning, And I think there's 2 ways you can do that. We can do that by brute force, which maybe represents the kind of the computing, school of computing side of the research, or we can go down this kind of social practices route, which maybe represents the I don't know. I made that up just then. So this idea of brute force, and there's lots of ways we can go down the brute force, and I think this is kind of open. If you think this is a good idea, and you think brute force is maybe a valid way forward, what we're going to do, I've visualized every word. Now, some of the feedback from the thing is that some of the words are not very meaningful, but then how do you judge meaning when you've just got a data set of words? Maybe the word... different people have got different ways of using the tool. Some people find that word meaningful, some people will not, So when you're visualizing on every word, you are going to get quite a lot of words in there. How, why, maybe why is a good word though. Someone clicked on the word hope. One of the tutors clicked on the word hope, and then all these comments go, I hope I learn this, and I hope I learn that. I thought, well, that's a really valid use of it, but I had not thought of that. I was thinking of people clicking on, that was in the corpus linguistics course. I was thinking, people will click on collocation, they're going to click on, these big words, but people are clicking on other words. So I don't know whether there's certainly something with visualizing every word that's maybe not necessarily, it's giving you too many false positives. The cloud's a bit too big, it needs to be smaller and more specific. So do we go down a route of automated content analysis? So there's various ways you can kind of automate analysis, noun phrase extraction, or sentiment analysis on things. There's this thing called Flesch-Kincaid, which is kind of readability. Do you add that as metadata to the conversation and then visualize based upon that metadata? Do we look more down the corpus linguistics route? So we look at what words collocate with other words, or this idea of keyness, which is, which is whether the word appears more or less frequently in your corpus than it does in the BNC. So that's kind of showing you a sort of, yes, presumably the word collocate has got a high keyness in the corpus linguistics course than it does in the the BNC, I would imagine. Do we look at just comments with links because they're showing people going further to look at another thing? There's all different ways we can use brute force to look through that corpus and give some scores. I feel.
Coming back to your point about hope.
Yeah.
And that's a small word in
yeah.
the word cloud. Do you think it's worth counting what people click on in terms of the value of that word increases, not necessarily in size of the word cloud, but in terms of recording of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly do collect. That is one of the pieces of trace data that we collect. We know what people click on. I don't think I've got a great data set from that yet, but I do have a list of all the words that people click on, so I can see how popular that word was within the word cloud. Maybe that could feed back into this brute force way of creating visualizations. Yeah.
If you're saying, I hope I can learn more from this course.
Yeah.
They're demonstrating that they aspirations for more learning.
And I think it was useful that a mentor clicked on that word, because she was obviously probably clicking on it thinking, well, I want to know what they're going to ask me. And if they're saying, I hope to learn about this, I hope to learn about that, it kind of tells them where they want to do the reading. Because these things are quite open, MOOCs are quite open. I mean, it kind of goes with the territory. And I thought this other way of doing it, and this is kind of the route that I'd like to try and follow initially, is this idea of changing learner practices. I'm not ruling this brute force route out. I'm just not quite sure where to take it, so I'll be interested in people's ideas. But this idea of changing learner practices so that people will start hashtagging their own content, basically. And so the occurrence of the hashtag will be kind of replicated throughout the course, throughout the comments, and then that will show you maybe a graph that looks more like that. So it's got kind of themes, or maybe communities, or some other type of way of kind of tagging here. This is what this comment is about if you want to come and join me in this conversation. And so on my next slide, I'm looking at what practices, I said what theory, and we went through that, what future practices can we bring into this idea of MOOC? And I think the applications that are dealing with this mass collaboration, you're talking like Twitter, Instagram, and they're kind of going down this route of saying, well, what's trending today? That kind of is what the word cloud will show you, what's trending. It's not quite what's trending today, but that could be built in, what hashtags, hashtags which have been through, people hashtag their own comments. Maybe they could just go through and hashtag other people's comments. So there's this idea, going back to this cooperation idea, that I've heard, I guess it's just anecdotal evidence, or just read somewhere, that there are a group of Wikipedians who will just correct grammar. So they'll go onto a page, that it should have an apostrophe, I'll put that in. And so maybe we can kind of create this kind of level of participation in MOOCs where people just go around saying, oh, that comment's about dogs, hashtag dogs, and then just move on, and so we kind of, they're enriching their own data set, they're enriching the visualization, they're making it better for everyone else. And I think maybe possible outcomes of that, maybe they feel they've got more ownership over the MOOC, maybe we get more emergent communities. And we're clearly enriching the data set and kind of creating a kind of a grounded way of creating themes and signs. And I've got this picture here, which I took from Instagram, and it's just a picture of a dog, and there's a comment. So there's the comment, there's the piece of content, and what I realised on Instagram, and I'm not a big Instagram person, I only realised this, is that when you start writing hashtag, and then you'll start writing something, it suggests something to you. So it suggests, oh, why don't you use, pet sitting as a potential. You'll write PE and it'll say, why don't you suggest this one? And it'll tell you how many people are using that hashtag. You know, so it's quite a clever way of kind of bringing people into community, because otherwise, you know, on Instagram, there'd just be like 5 billion pictures and no one would know how to find anything. But you find them through getting familiar with these terms. And so they put lots of terms in. And I'm suggesting they could do the same thing. You know, you don't categorize the comment there. You can categorize it in lots of different places, and it's searchable through lots of different ways. So, you know, that's my suggestion as a kind of a pedagogic thread that could go through the MOOCs to say, why don't you hashtag your content? If you do it, you're going to get this good visualization. It's going to be much better to kind of to be able to find what you're interested in and find the communities that you want to get involved with, the conversations that you want to get involved with. So that's kind of my overall talk. I've gone to the next slide, which I think this is a seminar, so hopefully we can talk with each other, not just be a QA, even if it's a multi-dimensional QA. I think we're definitely in conference territory here, you know. But, you know, there are the questions: to what extent do our environment shape us? Or is it like Churchill said, or is it not a relevant factor? What does it mean for MOOCs? Are there any other conversational dimensions that could be measured as kind of proxies for this type of thing? How reliable are they, full stop? How reliable are each of the ones I've picked? Is it a good idea to port these ideas from social media? And what of the brute force method? Is it a good method, or is it just something that should be there in the toolkit? Because it probably will create quite a lot of false positives, I would imagine. I mean, you're not going to be able to categorize and do these things very accurately, and you're going to have to make certain technical decisions onto whether something gets categorized here or categorized there, and then it's going to do it for everything, you know. So they're the questions anyway. So I hope I haven't probably gone drastically under. I don't know.
No, that's okay. Really good. Well, I think we could continue now. So again, thank you, Phil, for such an interesting conversation and presentation. So for those who are online watching, you could just send your questions to addressseminars@lancaster.ac.uk, and then we could just voice your questions over here. Do we have any current questions? No. So then, okay, I will just open up the time for the questions for Phil. Please.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I can relatively interested. Okay. How do you avoid constraints of the algorithm within the context of, kind of the framework, and particularly your development? Kind of like, as an example, I was involved in a teaching learning experience, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which actually utilised simple blogs with a word cloud on each blog. So you could go to an individual blog, you could potentially understand thinking within the context like you're developing and thinking around that. But then within that particular blog, that sort of broadened out into the wider aesthetic of the identity of the individual, you know, which I think is particularly difficult to catch within an algorithmic sense or a framework sense. I mean, what's your thoughts around that kind of?
Well, I think the word cloud is kind of a brute force thing. There is a list of stop words. Yeah. I mean, if I have this idea of hashtags and someone thought, I'm going to try and hijack your system, I could add that word to the stop word list, and that would remove it from the word cloud straight away. So if there was something, you know, offensive in there, it will only pick up the top 200 words anyway. So that, you know, there was a conversation in the last MOOC which kind of skated quite close to being homophobic. And I looked at some of the words that were in there. There was a bit of a reasonable debate about, you know, church and all that kind of thing. Don't know why it was on chemistry MOOC, but that's diversity, hey. And I looked for some of the key words that were in that long conversation, and none of them appeared in the word cloud. So they obviously didn't hit that limit of getting into the cloud. So it is only the top 200. I mean, I think in terms of how it looks and I think that does feed into this idea that you're showing what's trending. Yeah. You know, I think that's almost this idea of the blog. You know, like you see a little word cloud, and that kind of is sort of saying, well, I'm visualizing everything to give you a concept map of what I'm about, isn't it? Yeah. And I think the word cloud can be used in that way. I mean, some of the data I've got, it suggests that 1/3 of word cloud users are not actually commenters. So people are using it as a kind of a vicarious tool to do that looking back, but never to go and actually participate in a conversation. But so I think that it does have that kind of that purpose for people who are just readers. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I was thinking at the word cloud too, but also the hashtagging. All that aims at content. But is there a way where you can also, maybe it's the hashtagging, to follow people? Because I mean, the motivation for us to engage is content on the one hand, but it can also be kind of it's not a relationship yet, but that we've read a couple of comments made by somebody. Yeah. This is a person worth following because I enjoy reading her comments, and this is a person that I could engage with on a personal level.
The platform has that built into it. I mean, I haven't got data to show how well that's used, but the way I think about MOOCs is this idea that you might find someone that you like, or you might want to follow a mentor, and certainly one of the filters is show me comments from people I follow, and so that there is quite an easy mechanism for doing that. One of the things I think people in MOOCs I don't think they want to form these tight-knit communities. I think they want to kind of move in a sort of a more an affinity way. So they have they don't want to be friends with you. They just want to participate in a conversation with you. So it's kind of like a networked, networked individualism with this idea of weak ties, where everyone's kind of got a weak tie to each other, but follow. I'm not sure is the best tool for that. I mean, on Twitter, I don't know. I mean, maybe do a quick poll. I mean, on Twitter, do you look through Twitter in terms of hashtags, in terms of affinity, or do you just read the posts that your friends put up? And I think there's probably a separation, I would imagine, between people who just look at what their friends do and people who actually follow the hashtags. Oh, I wonder what other people who I don't know are also saying about this. I think that's what I'm trying to foster in the MOOC platform.
But I'm just trying to think where I just saw the other day some recent research showing that on social media, basically you end up following people who are like you anyhow, which is the problem of hashtags. So in a sense, to what extent are you concerned that your focus on like word clouds and hashtags actually decreases
creating a filter bubble
rather than increases?
Well, I mean, I think by taking the word as the unit of meaning, you're not necessarily saying you're for or against that word. You're just saying you've used that word. So using the word as the unit of meaning does have that kind of, it could be one or the other, or any other interpretation of. I do get what you say about following and friending people, but I would suggest that that's more of a Facebook problem, which is all about the friends, and less of a Twitter problem, which is more about the content.
Right, somewhere in your talk you said that the posts fall off the bottom.
Yeah.
In the discussion forums, which is exactly what happens on Facebook. So if a post is not liked, or if it's disagreed with, not responded to, it can be a post that is an alternative perspective, but it drops off the bottom.
But I don't think it would necessarily drop off the bottom of the word cloud visualization if it's using words that that other people, you know, using common words. If the words were common, I think it would still appear in the word cloud. People would be able to read it and find it. Like you say, if it's not liked, then it's not getting kind of upvoted by the system as it stands. I mean, I see these comments are public. I mean, it's not like a Facebook feed where you only see comments that are either sponsored or from your friends. I mean, that is kind of that is almost like you're building your own filter bubble there. And this whole thing of only showing people from I follow would I think necessarily give you that kind of idea as well. But I think because all the comments are public, and because this is why I've kind of gone to Instagram, even though I don't really use or know that much about how it works, it seems to kind of draw communities and ideas together through this idea of A, it's public, and B, you know, using hashtags, not necessarily to say I'm for this opinion or against this opinion. It's just this is about this subject matter. Does that make sense?
Really enjoyed that. I thought it was really good. Thank you. And I think it's a really valuable bit of work because as a MOOC user, and I do just as you say, I just go in for interest. I don't really want to make friends or anything like that. I can see it's really I can see its value. And I wondered, on a practical note, how many words can you string together in order to narrow your post? So if you just put two. In the prototype, you can do two. Right. That's a technical limitation. There are things I'd like to do to the prototype. If we can go back to it, I'd like to show you some things I'd like to do other than the idea of weaving the visualization into the actual pedagogy itself. What I'd like to do with the prototype is, I just had an idea today about trending actually, so things that were posted in the last 24 hours, that's not something that I've thought of before, but what I'd quite like to have is kind of a navigation bar down here, which does week number, so you can filter by only visualize week 1, only visualize week 2, and then along the top here I'd like to have some tabs that give you different visualizations. So I'm not talking about throwing this visualization away in favour of hashtags. I'm talking about having a new tab which says this is the hashtag visualization. I think a third tab, going back to the point that we made about following, would be about comments that mentors make, because I think there is quite a reasonable, I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that people want to see what the tutors are saying. They want to feel that teaching presence, as it were, you know, and they can get lost in the MOOC as well. So I'd like to have a third one, which is about what the teachers are saying and how can I quickly get to teacher comments and teacher conversations. They're kind of, you know, they're my first ideas anyway for the thing. I mean, with Phil, we've been looking at some other types of visualization that are not word clouds at all, actually, but are ways of visualizing what I'm talking about versus what you're talking about, and kind of say, are we using the same words? If we are, we're closer together in the visualizer. It's more like a scattergraph of nodes to say, you're close to that person, but you're far away from that person. Maybe that's kind of getting the filter bubble starting again there. But, yeah, sorry. Is that... No, that's really, and the other interesting thing I thought you said was about how the tutor went in, or the mentors they called, and they clicked on hope, and I can see the value of that for people running and facilitating these courses, and how they might use it actually. So that's really,
I mean, you can see here there's a word yet. I've just seen it's quite a small word. I don't know what you'd expect to get by clicking on that. Probably a whole random selection of comments. I mean, but then maybe if you're a corpus linguist, I'm only going to look at pronouns. You know, maybe that's what you're interested in. You know, it's kind of, I think it gives you a way through. I mean, ultimately, it's just saying, look, there's more comments than you're ever going to read, and they're all about a diverse number of subjects that you're not always going to be interested in. This is kind of a method of just trying to find who's in front of you, who's behind you, and who's got your interest, basically. So you're not kind of just going along this train. You can only talk to the people in the carriage. You know.
Just coming back to your point about the number of words, are you suggesting increasing The limitation is two words.
The limitation is 2 words. But what I would say is you click on it, it comes up, and then you have an X next to it. This is like kind of how I would design it. So you click on landscape, and landscape comes up at the top with an X. You take it away, and then it redraws the cloud without that word included. So the whole thing just becomes a little bit more sophisticated. Basically, that's just adding sophistication to the code, really, rather than lots of concepts as well, I suppose.
So do we want more words in there in the context of what?
I think so. I think we might find there's a hard limit. I've certainly been playing around with the word cloud tool before, where you click on it and then suddenly it returns 0 comments, and you think, why does it return 0 comments? And maybe it's kind of just a technical thing that there just aren't enough comments that use that string of words to be able to draw a cloud, and so you don't get a cloud. And there's kind of outliers like that which you'd have to find. Okay, where's the speed limit? Maybe it's 5. Maybe if you go beyond 5, you just filter it in so far that you haven't got enough words to make a cloud, basically.
Thanks, Phil. It's really interesting. I remember how you started the talk, which of course was actually you spent quite a lot of time before even showing us this tool. I'm just conscious that a lot of the questions have been specifically about the tool. Now, where you started was 2 things. It included Laurilard's conversational framework has been used as the basis of building this platform, in which some shared objects, they seem to be videos from the examples you've been showing, some shared objects support conversation that reveals different conceptions, interpretations, I can't remember quite how you put it. And you also said this is a design-based research project. Part of the purpose of doing that is to challenge theories. Now, I wasn't sure which theories you were looking to challenge, but I presume Laurilard's conversational framework might be a candidate given here. Now, it seems that what this actually does is to decenter those shared objects provided by the teacher. It takes attention away from having a situation where the conversation is supposed to say, in a naive way, emerge in a thread underneath one visual artifact. It introduces some other artifact that says, actually, it's going to be some content that's already been contributed that's the central attention here that could be across any artifact, and so the conversation is not really anymore centered around an object. Now, I wondered to what extent that's a conscious decision to challenge the centrality of these artifacts. Are you trying to challenge the conversational framework and to remold the conversations in the MOOC in some particular way? Or is this another
Well, I guess this is another artifact, isn't it, really? That's kind of, I suppose I would go down the route saying this is another artifact, but it's kind of an interactive artifact rather than being, like you say, some piece of content around which the conversation is scaffolded. And so I've never thought of it as being challenging the conversational framework, actually. I've kind of thought of it as being extending on what FutureLearn are trying to do anyway by suggesting that they've got a social learning platform. I'm trying to kind of extend that and try to add scale to the to the concept.
Can I just quickly come back? So if this is another artifact built within this framework, then can people store copies of this cloud and start a conversation below that about the content of the cloud and how they found that interesting and revealing of something?
They can comment on the cloud step. So there will be some comments on this step. 82 of them. It's still interesting, but but people will see a different artifact. It is a shifting.
I was wondering whether
it is a shifting. There is no way of saying save this word cloud because the word it's necessarily a representation of the corpus.
Yeah.
And so, depending on what people click on, they're going to get different clouds. And there was actually within this thread here, there's certainly someone wrote this idea of. See, I'm just using another searching tool here. Kind of had this idea of cloud hopping or something. Maybe it's on the other step, and he was basically saying, "Oh, I love the tool." And where was it? It was probably one of the first things. Someone wrote that the cloud, how it changes and how you can see as a concept map the different things people are talking about. So I think it does serve that kind of dual
Someone did write, one of the mentors wrote that they were trying clicking on these different words, and they thought it was interesting how every day it looked like it was a different object every day, you know. And I think that's a good thing about the tool. I don't necessarily think you should have kind of a save button, because it's not about the aesthetic of the artifact, although some people just say, oh, this is a great aesthetic, I'd like to print it out. I think it is more about the utility of the thing and the representation of the corpus, actually.
I have a question in regards to design-based research. Sorry to jump.
Okay.
Just very quickly, you mentioned you had some other ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Are those ideas linked to the design-based research methodology that you're adopting in kind of getting feedback from users?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I would say it's the same. Again, it's starting the process, but maybe with a different visualization. So there's this idea. The base idea is that visualization is a way to cut through scale, and then the different designs that can be made upon that idea are things like, I mean, you've seen the node graph that we developed, and there's the word cloud idea. There's different branches to the word cloud idea. There's possibly other visualizations that no one's thought of yet that I'd be interested to hear about as well, that maybe kind of, you know, tries to cut through that idea of scale and the sort of the denseness of the scale.
And possibly different types of data in terms of looking at the overall user data. I know you're using a small chunk of that user data, and we've discussed how look at all the existing possible data and see if we could.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it starts from the premise. I mean, the one thing I probably didn't go on so much about, but the premise of where I start, I find in a lot of the MOOC research that people talk about what happened in the MOOC. So something happened, and then people say, well, this is what happened in the MOOC, and then they draw kind of conclusions about this kind of post hoc analysis. And I think, if I'm trying to challenge anything, I think it's trying to challenge that kind of analysis, and that goes through to the design-based research, that we should be developing things that actually help people as they're learning, not just say afterwards, oh, well, you didn't learn because of X, Y, and Z, or you did learn because of X, Y, and Z. You know, to actually say, well, here's a tool, see if it works, and then we can kind of iterate upon that design. You know, so it is. I'm trying to be quite practical, you know, about the thing, and you know.
Yeah, my question is more. I kind of like. I want to go to the first part of your presentation. It's kind of common that many people are trying to criticize about the MOOCs or the hype created by all the MOOC scholars. And they always start with this conversation. It's all behavioralistic way of doing it, and unlike they promised. But my question is whether it's really, do we have to have conversation on MOOCs? Like, basically, my understanding of constructivism is that everyone will learn, create new knowledge, no matter what kind of situation they're in. Just how people learn and make new knowledge itself is always should be constructivism, what kind of pedagogical tools we are providing. And having said that, okay, MOOC is somewhere there. However, if you think about like learner's life as a whole, who's like the life is always embedded in the physical kind of like daily based. We don't really know what's going on in their actual life, and just try to capture everything and try to understand learners' learning based on that small like kind of environment online there called MOOCs environment, or like FutureLearn. So that kind of assumption, the starting point itself can be a little bit like shaky, or I'm sorry, I'm not asking questions, but like my problem with this kind of, you know, criticism about MOOCs is that it kind of take the value of MOOCs away from its original starting point being accessible and giving the resources for free, and the student can start with something, but their learning can be all constructivist in their own way, in their daily life or whatever situation they're in. So if we don't really have much kind of thought on that and try to develop new tools and to really kind of constrain and control student learning within that platform itself, is quite against the constructivist learning kind of ethos. Sorry, that's kind of my personal concern nowadays, where we're going with this kind of study. Do you have any thought on that?
I mean, I think I think you've described constructive. I think the thing that there's this idea of social constructivism, isn't there? Where it's kind of we're constructing this meaning through our social interactions. It's not just kind of constructing meaning because we exist and we're taking in experiences. They're two kind of ideas, aren't they? I think that I don't know really. I mean, I would say just going back to what I'm trying to do, giving people a tool that they don't usually have, which is kind of being able to cut through this idea of scale. I think that's kind of, what you said before about open education, there's always been these groups of, this kind of resource-led open education. And I think, in part of the brief on the poster, I said, there's this idea, what do MOOCs give to open education? What do they take away? And I think in some ways, what they take away is these very, these sort of grounded groupings of people who are kind of just aggregating around various resources, but they add quite a lot of structure and quite a lot of validity and programs of study. So there's kind of, I think there's yeah. Sorry.
Well, I think we have time only for one last question. Is there any?
Yes, I also find it really interesting. But you have started from the premise of accepting the platform as it is. So, coming to your point, really another assumption on top of the original idea was not social constructivism at all, but connectivism on distributed platforms. So you're just taking that completely out of the equation, are you? The whole way of thinking and saying, okay, I'm starting here with the FutureLearn platform, and accepting that as is without questioning it as a good place for learning in the first place.
Well, I was thinking about this. I was thinking about there is this sort of this criticism, like you say, that but people are clearly learning. You can kind of say, well, there's no evidence for the learning. There's no evidence of these conversations, that conversations. That you can look at assessment scores, completion rates, all these different things within the MOOC concept. Say, they're kind of evidence that learning's not happening. But I think clearly learning is happening because people keep flocking to them. So there's obviously some value that's being found in them. I do get the thing about the idea of connectivism and using multiple platforms to do this learning. But I suppose I am just practically just taking FutureLearn as a platform and saying, what can we do to this particular platform to kind of to improve the social learning experience? That's kind of a practical thing. That's not taken away from the fact that there are these other more distributed forms of learning and kind of network learning, like the idea of connectivism, having your own space where you publish things. But I think the barriers to entry to those are sometimes quite high in terms of being able to get true value. So I'm just saying, well, this is kind of, people are coming to this platform, so they are learning. What can we do to improve that learning experience?
Thank you so much again, Phil, and thank you so much all for coming along today. Before I close up, there's a couple of things that I would like to say. A copy of this PowerPoint presentation and the video recording of the seminar will be available shortly on the Educational Research website. The room is available until 2:30 to further continue the discussion. If you would like, Phil probably will be here too. The next seminar will be again in this room, B89 County South, on January 17th. 2018, and the presenter will be Dr. Melis Jin, our new acquaintance in the Department of Educational Research. Rebecca, do we have questions? Sorry, I forgot to check, but yeah, okay, so that's all. Thank you again so much for coming, and again, thank you, Phil, so much.